I am a philosopher. How many of you have ever met a philosopher? And if you live in Sedona and you know me, that doesn't count. Okay, a few of you, but not very many. There aren't a lot of philosophers, and maybe because of that, a lot of people don't understand philosophy. Some people think that philosophy is just a cliche, like early to bed, early to rise, or work hard, play hard. But philosophy isn't a saying, and it's not something you have. Philosophy is something that you do. Philosophy is an activity. It's a practice where we ask and we try to answer questions about ourselves and about other people and about the world. And doing philosophy is really a lot of fun because it can be interesting to learn about ourselves and other people and the world. It's often fascinating. And there is no better place to do philosophy than outside. You see, I'm just not unusual because I'm a philosopher. I'm really unusual because I take people outdoors to do philosophy. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got started. I always loved my philosophy classes in college, but I never thought that I could make a career out of being a philosopher. And in fact, some people in my family told me that I couldn't. So I started out working for nonprofits and in higher ed. And I got a promotion at work, and they wanted me to get a master's degree. And it could be in anything. So I picked philosophy. And then I just kept going. And what I really loved about philosophy, which was a little out of step with the profession, was how it helped me understand my own life. And because I had worked in communities, I really felt like philosophy could be a resource to build and to strengthen communities. And because I believed this, I started experimenting with ways to make this happen. And I've been curating public philosophy programs for about 7 years now. And I've been nationally recognized for that work. But it was only recently that I discovered I didn't just want to take philosophy out of the classroom and into the community. I wanted to take philosophy out into the natural world, on trails and on rivers and under the stars. You see, I am lucky enough to live here in Sedona, Arizona, and it is one of the most beautiful places in the world. And I had known for a while that Sedona was a perfect place to connect with nature, but it was only later that I realized it was also the perfect place for reflection and discussion. So now, I was not just creating new ways to do philosophy, I was finding new places to do philosophy. And when we're thinking about things, I think that place is actually a very important and an often overlooked consideration. We do most of our thinking in places that are kind of like this. They're usually rectangular interiors and they're flat. And we often find ourselves at straight desks and in front of screens. And there's usually artificial lighting, lots of artificial lighting in here right now, right? And a lot of times that's unavoidable. I do a lot of thinking like that myself. But when we go outside into the natural world, our mind and our body and all of our senses are activated. And our creativity and our imagination expands in nature. And when people are climbing to the top of Eagle's Nest, the challenge of that climb can actually reframe challenges in your life. And people have ideas on the trails that they do not get at their desk or on the couch. So whether you're looking at a majestic view of Cathedral Rock or just a tiny Mariposa flower, these are more than pleasant things to see. They can spark ideas about things in your life, like your relationship with your daughter, or how to deal with a divorce, or just where you are with your career or where you're living. And just as much as being out in nature is important, so is the conversational exchange, the collaborative inquiry, where we ask questions and more questions. And sometimes people get outside and they ask questions they never thought of before. And this can lead to insight and people understanding their lives in brand new ways. So I was telling a respected colleague about the programs I created and how people were sending me notes and writing me emails and how much it meant to them. And he just sat there and he said, well, that's all very nice, Andrea, but that's not what philosophers do. I know, I didn't think that there was a universal job description for a philosopher. I mean, it's true that I wasn't writing journal articles or teaching undergraduates about Plato, but I thought that there was enough of that going on already. And you know, I'd had enough success over the last few years to realize that philosophy really can be a real-world resource and a personal resource, especially when it's intentionally deployed that way. I've had clients in Sedona who have traveled all over the world and talked with very accomplished people. But they said sometimes those conversations were trite and sort of empty, and they really appreciated having the opportunity to reflect on their lives in a meaningful way. So I thought again about my friend saying, that's not what philosophers do, as if it just was the case. And then I remembered the philosopher David Hume and the is-ought fallacy. You see, just because something is the case doesn't mean that it ought to be the case. And this is connected to the fact-value distinction. Now, most of us are used to distinguishing between facts and values. That's been around for a while. After all, David Hume was an 18th century Scottish Enlightenment philosopher. But it got me thinking about how still, so often, we try to settle questions of value by stating matters of fact. And we've been doing this for a long time. There's actually an iconic figure in American culture who reminds us of this. It's Joe Friday of the Dragnet TV series. "Just the facts, ma'am," is Joe Friday's signature line. I think it's worth noting that Friday says this to women. And then the non-factual gets feminized. It gets trivialized. I call this dragnet deception because it assumes that facts matter most when actually, in any given scenario, it is our values that determine which facts are even relevant. As much as we might like to put facts first, our values are always prior and they are always in play. Now, one reason people like to talk about the facts is that facts are firm. You get the facts right or you don't. And with values, we always have to make a case. And even if you make a really good case, you can't prove it. Now, that's not to say that reasonable people can't agree that some values are important or appropriate in one context and not another. But even if you get overwhelming consensus that kindness is good, and it is, you can't prove it. And people like proof. Just compare these two statements. I base my decision on the facts. That seems responsible and sensible. Now consider, I base my decision on my values. Well, that seems subjective, and maybe the basis isn't as firm, except that nearly all decisions are based on both objective facts and personal values. And we just get comfortable talking about facts and citing statistics, so oftentimes we can forget this. But after all, Friday only wanted facts about crime because he valued justice and putting criminals away. It was his values of justice and law-abidingness that determined the facts that he cared about. And you know, maybe his job would have been easier if he would have listened to the women and learned about their values and what those women understood about the values of other people. Because after all, when you're trying to solve crimes, it's helpful to know not just the facts about what happened or didn't, but what motivates people, what they care about, and why. So I was still thinking about my friend who said, that's not what philosophers do, And while that was ostensibly a factual claim, the real issue hanging in the air was whether my way of doing philosophy had any value. And so at this point, it was time for me to do some reflection. Outside, of course, with my friends, so that I could get clear about the values that were grounding my work and grounding my life. And while our values and what we value are not identical, I'm going to use those terms somewhat interchangeably because I really think that in this fact-focused world, one of the most important things this sort of reflection can do is help us all get clear about our values and what we value. So when I went outside, I discovered 4 things: nature, judgment, authenticity, and love. And I'm going to say just a little bit about each of those. First, I valued my connection to nature, because in nature, I found inspiration and creativity and vitality. And in a world where it is so easy to become disconnected from nature, I really wanted to honor that, and I wanted to share it with others. Second, I valued judgment, or my ability to make considered decisions. You see, since I was creating new ways of doing philosophy, I was going to have to rely on my own discernment. And a friend reminded me of the Stoic philosopher and Roman emperor Marcus Aurelius, who encourages us to venerate our faculty of judgment, to act in accordance with nature and our ruling center, our intuition. Third, and closely related to judgment, is authenticity, really being myself. And authenticity has a lot to do with honesty, and I had to be really honest with myself and other people about why I thought it was so beneficial to go outside and think and talk about things. And fourth, and finally, there was love. And this began with self-love, because even though I really wanted my colleague to respect my work, I finally realized that it was going to have to be enough for me to respect my work. And once I could do that, which wasn't quite as easy, maybe, as it sounds, I could then let my resentment of other people go. And there's a real peace and a real power if we can love not just the people that we adore, but those who bring challenges and criticisms into our life. But if you can do that, it really changes the way that you view and that you move through this world. And I certainly hadn't always done that, but it was important to me now. And so that's an example of what you can discover, what I discovered by going out in nature on trails and talking to people, right, about my own values and why my 4 grounding values are nature, judgment, authenticity, of love. Now, you may notice that I didn't try to give a general account of values that I think are appropriate for everybody. General accounts have certainly been given. They've been given by all major religious traditions and many philosophical ones. But I didn't give a general account because I'm not living a general life. I'm living my own particular life. And just like you are all living your own particular lives, you can choose, you can really decide on, and you can honor your own particular values. Because unlike the facts, our values are entirely up to us. And we can change them. And we usually do change them. And it makes sense that we would change them over the course of our lives. And this can happen consciously or unconsciously. But consciously is better. So, I invite you to consciously decide on your values. And I recommend going outside, get out of buildings, look at landscapes, and talk to someone you really respect. Because if you get clear about your values, it will help you understand yourself and other people and the world. Thank you.